Welcome back to the channel. I wanted to share with you today a passage from a book that I found to be a very good argument being made for the spirituality of everyday life. This is from the book The Meaning of Happiness by Alan Watts, published back in 1940. But I suspect many of the messages he was sharing in this book, like many of his other works, still hold true to this day. So on page 51 of the first New World Library printing from 2018, here's a section titled The Spirituality of Everyday Life. Quote, "All this, however, does not take place in the ecstasy of trance, in some abstract state of consciousness where all shapes and substances have become merged into a single infinite essence. The spiritual man does not perform his ordinary activities as one in a dream, letting his surface thoughts and deeds run on mechanically. He can become just as much absorbed in the usual affairs of the world as anyone else, but in a certain way he sanctifies them, for under his hands sharpening a pencil becomes as much a religious act as prayer or meditation. Indeed, he can afford to become absorbed in everyday affairs almost more than others, and he can do so with a certain zest and abandon, for to him, ordinary human thoughts and activities are as much included in the dance of the spirit as is anything else. This, indeed, is much of his secret, for he knows that spirituality does not consist in thinking always about the spiritual as such. His world is not divided into watertight compartments, and his religion is not a special form of thought and activity, for the spiritual and the material are not separated. But because a man does not occupy himself with the ordinary pursuits of mankind, this is no indication that he lacks spiritual understanding. He is free to follow whatever occupation he pleases: monk, philosopher, lawyer, clerk, or tradesman. But from the spiritual point of view, a priest is not necessarily more holy than a truck driver. Furthermore, to obtain spiritual experience, it is not essential to vex your mournful minds with pious pains, to spend years in the study of theology, to retire from the world, to become a vegetarian and teetotaler, to practice mental acrobatics and seek out higher realms of consciousness, to abstain from sexuality, or to develop such peculiar gifts as fourth-dimensional vision. Certainly these things are necessary for the professional philosopher, or for that particular type of scientist whose field of research is the psychic world. If we're going to find out how our present senses may be developed, how can we tap sources of nervous energy as yet unused, how can we understand time in terms of space and see past and future at once, how can we transfer thought, or how we can acquire the faculty of immovable concentration, then indeed we have to go in training even more vigorously than the professional athlete. To acquire psychic faculties, you must practice just as much as if you wanted to hold the world's record for sprinting, or to be able to walk on hot coals without being burned." End quote. So, you see, spirituality is not something you find by running off to a mountain, in a cave, or detaching yourself from the world's so-called distractions. It's not something that requires you to turn your life into some rigorous routine of endless practices or a parade of disciplines. Real spirituality is much simpler, much closer, and far more natural than that. In fact, the most remarkable thing is how ordinary it all really is. The Meaning of Happiness talks about this beautifully. Spirituality doesn't happen in some abstract state of trance where you disappear into an infinite essence, losing touch with the forms and substances of life. No. The real spiritual person is just as involved in the everyday affairs of life as anyone else, if not more so. It's just that they see it differently. So, take a moment to imagine that all of the mundane things you do, the tasks that you brush off as unimportant, sharpening a pencil, for instance, or answering an email, could be approached with the same sacred attention as a prayer or a meditation. It's not about floating through your day in some kind of dream state. Rather, it's about being fully present, being fully absorbed in the small, seemingly trivial activities of life. Because that, the pencil sharpening, the walking to the store, the washing of dishes, is where the dance of the spirit is taking place. In this modern world, especially here in 2024, people are constantly dividing their lives. There's the part that's spiritual, the meditation retreat, the yoga class, the moments of stillness and mindfulness. And then there's the rest of life, the commute, the deadlines, the to-do list, the never-ending demands. We see these parts as separate, as if they're somehow at odds with one another. But in truth, this division is completely artificial. The spiritual person, as described in the meaning of happiness, has realized that there are no watertight compartments between the spiritual and the material. They don't have a special time or place for being spiritual. Instead, they see the spiritual in everything they do. The secret is this: spirituality doesn't consist in always thinking about the spiritual. It's not about focusing on some abstract idea of enlightenment or peace. It's about how you move through life, how you flow with the rhythms of each moment. Now, think about how your life is structured. We've got this constant fragmentation. Work, family, social media, entertainment. It all feels compartmentalized, does it not? The phone buzzes, the emails pile up, and there's this ongoing sense of distraction. But what if I told you that all of this can be integrated into your spiritual practice? And yes, even the distractions. In fact, this is precisely what a spiritual person realizes. There's no such thing as a distraction from life because everything is life. And if you approach it mindfully, if you're fully absorbed in whatever you're doing, you'll find that the mundane becomes the sacred. Take the job you do. It doesn't matter whether you're a truck driver, a software engineer, a nurse, or a CEO. Spirituality doesn't play favorites. Your job, whatever it may be, can become a spiritual practice. The task in front of you, if you give it your full attention, if you allow yourself to be fully absorbed in it, becomes an opportunity to participate in the flow of the universe. It becomes an opportunity to dance with life. But people these days often think that in order to be spiritual, they have to follow certain disciplines, become vegetarian, abstain from this or that, meditate for a certain amount of time every day, chase after so-called higher realms of consciousness. These are often seen as the signs of spiritual progress, but none of that is necessary. In 2024, we see spirituality commodified. There's an app for mindfulness, a subscription for meditation, and countless self-improvement books, all telling you that you're just not spiritual enough. But this kind of striving, this attempt to be more spiritual, is itself a trap. The truth is, spirituality is not about chasing after some distant, exalted state. It's not about being better, holier, more enlightened. It's about being fully here. You see, there's a great misunderstanding that spirituality means retreating from life, detaching from the world. But real spirituality is about embracing life fully, in its ordinary, messy, and mundane glory. The problem is, most of us have been taught to look for something extraordinary. We think to ourselves, if I meditate long enough, I'll experience some blissful state. If I purify my diet and my body, I'll feel more connected to the divine. And it's not that these practices are without merit. They have their place. But true spirituality isn't about adding more practices or purifying oneself into some perfect state. No. It's about realizing that you don't need to become something more than you are. Because who you are, in this very moment, is already part of the divine dance. Modern life, with its noise, its distractions, its endless demands, make it easy to think that spirituality must be something separate, something higher. But just let me remind you, spirituality is not something you have to search for. It's not something you need to attain. It's something you live. It's something you express in how you wash the dishes, how you answer an email, how you sharpen a pencil. All of these things are already part of the great cosmic dance. So, stop thinking about spirituality as something you need to get to, and start seeing it as what you're already doing. And if you can begin to approach life this way, if you can bring mindfulness to each small, ordinary act, you'll find that the whole world transforms. The spiritual is not something far off. It's here. It's in the everyday, in the now, in the simple act of being alive.